How you doing?
We are doing fantastic. How about you?
July 21st, 2011. Atlantis lands at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida, having completed the 135th and final Space Shuttle mission.
Atlantis, a ghostly silhouette swooping across the end of the runway and touching down to complete a flawless mission, its final flight.
This is the story of a dream to make space travel affordable with a reusable spacecraft.
I thought there's no way anything this big will ever get off the planet.
Told by the men and women who risked everything trying to make that dream come true.
Most fantastic day of my entire life was first day the shuttle lifted off.
We have made it to the start.
And the shuttle has cleared the tower.
In its 30-year career, NASA's flagship has flown more miles, completed more missions, and delivered more hardware than any other space vehicle in history. Success, however, has come at a tragic cost.
Go with throttle up.
You're accepting the reality that you just saw a crew die.
But the shuttle has transformed our world, thrown new light on the origins of the universe, and laid firm foundations for future exploration in deep space.
The shuttle really was revolutionary.
From first small step to final stop, this is the life of the shuttle.
After serving the world for over 30 years, the Space Shuttle has come to a final stop.
Launch day at Cape Canaveral on Florida's Atlantic coast. Thousands of space enthusiasts descend on the town of Titusville to witness the space shuttle blast into orbit. The shuttle is the most sophisticated and complex vehicle in the world. Before launch, it weighs 2,200 tons. To defy gravity and get into space, the shuttle and her crew must survive a controlled explosion of extraordinary proportions.
You're watching those digits flicker off that clock, and you know what's coming. At T-minus 6 seconds, the liquid engines start.
The main engines fire up, fueled by 800 tons of liquid hydrogen and oxygen.
And the noise level, you just can't picture how noisy that is.
At blastoff, 2 rocket boosters ignite, releasing 6 million pounds of thrust, the equivalent of nearly 24 jumbo jets.
Liftoff. We have liftoff. Liftoff of Columbia.
Liftoff.
That you get this growling, real high frequency, like that. It just really, really shakes you.
And it looks very slow and gentle as it lifts off. No, it slaps you back in your seat and you lift off at just about 2 times the force of gravity.
8 seconds roll, and the roll program is Roger.
40 seconds later, the shuttle accelerates through Mach 1, over 700 miles per hour. 2 minutes later, the 2 rocket boosters jettison.
Okay, lift away.
When the engines quit, there's a cheer on the intercom. Everybody just cheers because you have a sense that most of the danger is behind you now.
It takes just 8.5 minutes for the spacecraft and her crew to get into orbit. But 40 years ago, when the shuttle program began, all this was still just a tantalizing dream. The world's fascination with space peaked in 1969, when Neil Armstrong first stepped on the moon.
The Eagle has landed. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
America had jumped into the space race full body to establish leadership in space, to beat the Russians to the moon, to use the space program as a symbol of American leadership, accomplishing great things in full public view.
With the space race won, astronauts became national heroes, inspiring the next generation of space traveler. Men like Mike Mullane.
I wanted to be an astronaut as soon as I heard the word. I was a child of the space race, and I fell in love with everything associated with space, with rockets, with astronomy. Started building homemade rockets and testing them from the deserts. I say homemade rockets, they were actually pipe bombs with fins. Amazing I didn't blow myself to hell and back with these things.
But by the early 70s, the public's excitement for the moon landings was on the wane.
Well, the public is fickle in some ways. So the first lunar landing was a huge event. The nation was behind it. It was part of the Cold War. The United States and the Western civilization is technologically superior. The second moon landing was ho-hum. The third moon landing attempt, nobody paid any attention to.
Putting a man on the moon cost $25 billion. The next chapter of space exploration would need to be far cheaper.
Much of the activities of the 1960s was fueled by this space race with the Soviet Union. But all through this period, NASA officials are saying, we got to find a better way to do this. We got to find something that's more economical, that's more reliable, that's more safe and routine.
Since the 1960s, NASA had been designing a reusable winged spacecraft that would launch into orbit as a rocket, but return to Earth as an airplane. They called it the Space Shuttle.
The Space Shuttle is the most complex spacecraft ever attempted. It was a combination of a rocket, a spacecraft, a glider. It relied on both internal and external propulsion systems. For the first time, it had wings and wheels so that it can come back and land on a runway.
The shuttle would be more efficient and more economical than the Saturn rockets that powered Apollo missions to the moon.
A new door to space opens. The Space Shuttle. Everything that has gone before in space is prologue.
The shuttle's purpose would be to exploit space, carrying satellites and scientific equipment in its enormous cargo bay.
The sense was that now space was accessible for human activity, and the next step should be to begin to use space for practical purposes and for benefits here on Earth. And in order to do that, it would be necessary to have a new spacecraft that could provide routine access to space.
The shuttle would be a delivery truck, a motorhome, and a science laboratory in one.
Infinity has a new complexion, and we must identify it. This is not fiction. It is as real as man's purpose to survive and to grow.
But building a vehicle capable of routinely blasting into space and returning to Earth would create one of the greatest challenges in the history of NASA. As the shuttle era draws to a close, the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum has devoted itself to preserving the shuttle's history. And one of the most fascinating aspects of this history is the design evolution of a unique spacecraft.
But it was that aircraft metaphor, I think, that really guided the early development of the shuttle. I mean, everybody used to say, well, if you had to build a new airplane every time you wanted to fly from New York to Los Angeles, we'd never have intercontinental flights. And that's true. And the follow-on was that the shuttle was going to make spaceflight as easy, as cheap, and as safe as commercial air travel.
At the Smithsonian, they tell the story of how the shuttle's iconic shape developed.
We're in the exhibits division of the National Air and Space Museum, where we're in the final stages of laying out our history of the evolution of the Space Shuttle. There were many, many options for what a space shuttle could look like. They began by looking at fully reusable designs that had a piloted orbiter on top of or connected to a piloted booster. Another consideration was whether the vehicle should have straight wings or triangular delta wings. Another big consideration was how to control the size of the orbiter itself and minimize weight in the orbiter so that it could carry more payload. So there was a decision to put a big external tank under the orbiter.
Through this design process, the shuttle became a reusable winged spacecraft with 2 reusable booster rockets. Only the large central fuel tank would be discarded. What would make the shuttle revolutionary was its reusability. NASA promised a frequent flyer with a price tag of just $10.5 million a mission.
There was a sense that it might be possible to fly a shuttle mission every week, to fly from multiple launch sites, to carry more and more payload, fly more and more frequently. And the sense of the economy of spaceflight was based on those very optimistic predictions.
With the basic design finalized by the early 70s, construction could begin. This spacecraft would be half rocket, half airliner. And it was built with a very specific job in mind. The moon was no longer NASA's primary goal. The shuttle would spend most of its time in low Earth orbit at altitudes between 200 and 300 miles. But getting the entire orbiter and its crew back to Earth in one piece would become the engineers' single biggest challenge.
Probably the biggest technological leap was protecting something that big from the heat of re-entry and be able to reuse that heat shield over and over and over again.
When the shuttle returns from space at hypersonic speed, it must plow through the dense air molecules of Earth's atmosphere. The resulting friction will generate temperatures up to 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit, enough to instantly melt the shuttle's metal airframe.
Well, the space shuttle is basically constructed like an aircraft. It's made out of aluminum. It is a wonderful metal to work with for airplanes, but it doesn't do very well at high temperatures. In fact, even at the temperatures you might get in your oven at 400 degrees Fahrenheit, it begins to soften. The problem with the space shuttle, of course, is it's coming back at about 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit on the bottom.
What we had been used to doing prior to that time was a capsule with an ablative heat shield on the back that burned away in the process of coming in for a landing and astronauts who were rescued at sea by the Navy. We want to get away from all of that with a space shuttle. So the re-entry process will be one in which the thermal protection system will not burn away. It will not be an ablative heat shield. It will be something that is reusable.
Designing a heat shield that could be used repeatedly became the priority for the engineers. The shuttle couldn't go into space until it was solved. In 1977, as the shuttle was still being built, NASA started recruiting pilots to fly their new spaceship.
I was working as a Navy test pilot when I saw the initial announcement that said NASA is wanting to take applications for Space Shuttle pilots and mission specialists. And I was fascinated by the Space Shuttle from day one. And I said, I have got to do that.
Astronauts had always been military test pilots, but the shuttle required an entirely new type of space traveler to launch and repair satellites and conduct scientific experiments in orbit. NASA recruited civilians with a broad range of experience, including, for the first time, women.
They were people that perhaps more Americans could identify with. You know, there's a doctor up there. There's an engineer up there. Not just macho military fighter pilots, test pilots, but people that look like more like ordinary citizens.
It was the first time they ever had minorities. We had African Americans, we had Asian American. First time we had females. There were 6 women in our group. So it was the first time there was a cross-section of America selected to be astronauts.
Way back in high school, I had the thoughts of science and space, astronauts, etc. But, you know, where I came from, you know, that wasn't the kind of thing a black kid thought about. You know, how do you get to do something like that? What do you do?
I was working at MIT, and so when they said they're looking for some new astronauts to fly on the shuttle, and by the way, we don't just need pilots, we want scientists and engineers, something I'd always dreamed of, and now I had a real shot at it.
The new astronauts started their training to operate the most complex machine ever built.
When you first walked into a simulator and the vast number of switches and the vast number of controls in the cockpit, and you looked around, you kind of had to say to yourself, am I really going to be able to learn how to fly one of these things?
They're there to train you on how to respond to end-of-the-world type disasters. You simulate lifting off, maybe 5 seconds up, one of the liquid engines failed. They're constantly putting in all of these failure modes so that you can learn how to bypass things, how to react, how to use your backups.
We used to affectionately refer to it as death by training.
As the astronauts' training continued, the engineers constructing the shuttle were desperately searching for a material that would protect the ship from the extreme heat of re-entry over and over again.
It was a lot of stress. We were working 68 hours a week, all the time, up for a long period of time.
After many failed attempts, Tom Moser and his team finally manufactured an exotic compound of pure silica glass fibers. Silica's chemical composition absorbs heat extremely slowly. So slowly that during re-entry, it was calculated the temperature of the shuttle's aluminum body could be kept under 348 degrees Fahrenheit. But there was a problem. The silica tiles couldn't be stuck directly to the aluminum.
We developed this thermal protection system, tailored it properly, but with the aluminum expanding and contracting a lot, and the tile not expanding and contracting hardly at all, going through the temperature range, we had to isolate the tiles from the aluminum structure.
A solution to the problem was found in the most unlikely of places.
We used a felt material. It was the same felt material that they make Stetson cowboy hats out of. So it wasn't exotic. We didn't come up with any new material.
The felt was stuck to the aluminum, and the tiles were stuck to the felt. And the glue they used could be found in every home in the country.
Well, the adhesive that we used is bathtub caulk. Same thing you use around the bathtub. It's a rubber. So using bathtub caulk and cowboy hat felt, we would attach this new, sophisticated, newly developed material to the aluminum structure. Lo and behold, you got a thermal protection system.
The team made 25,000 silica tiles and covered the vehicle with them.
So it was that kind of engineering problem that we came up with a, unique solution to it and fixed the problem and didn't add a lot of weight to the vehicle.
At the end of 1980, after nearly a decade in construction, the first reusable spaceship was revealed to the world. It reached nearly 200 feet in height and weighed over 2,000 tons.
When I first saw a space shuttle, I thought there's no way anything this big will ever get off the planet. Everything was gargantuan. And it was also a sense of, this is real. I mean, these things are real.
Big. It was very big. It was big.
The spacecraft's size wasn't the only surprise. NASA had performed landing tests with the Enterprise glider. But there was no way to perform an automated dry run of the launch. 2 crew members would be on board for one of the riskiest test flights in space history. To command the shuttle's maiden flight, NASA picked its most experienced astronaut, a man who'd walked on the moon, 50-year-old John Young.
It's hard to describe John because he is what I would say a typical country boy. He's always laid back, doesn't make a big deal about anything.
But underneath that low-key exterior is the mind of a really sharp engineer and pilot.
To accompany Young, the space agency chose Navy test pilot Bob Crippen.
So it was a truly dynamic duel that they had on board the spacecraft for the first time there. I think it was as great a team as ever been assembled in spaceflight.
Young and Crippen were about to put their lives on the line.
We weren't doing unmanned tests of this vehicle. The first time you flew it was the first time you flew it, and that is the nature of the shuttle program. High risk, high return.
America's entire space program was now riding on the skills of 2 men and an untried spaceship.
7, 6, 5, 4. We have a go for main engine start.
On the morning of April 12th, 1981, 500,000 people gathered at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida to witness the Space Shuttle's first flight into orbit. The world held its breath. During tests for the first Apollo launch in 1967, 3 American astronauts had died. A repeat of this tragedy could destroy the shuttle program.
The job that the space team and the space program had done.
It was very tense. The very first time we flew the shuttle, the whole shuttle system was the first time the whole shuttle stack flew with people on board.
They had tested the main engines on the ground. They had tested the solid boosters on the ground. Everything else was an unknown.
After a decade in the making, the Space Shuttle and her crew were about to face their 0 hour.
T-minus 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, 7.
As they're getting ready to start the engines, they initiate the deluge, and you see these literally tons of water going down into the flame pit.
6, 5, 4. We have a go for main engine start.
And then you see the explosive start of these engines that turns this water into steam.
We have the start.
out of this cloud of steam comes this rocket ship riding a pillar of fire.
America's first space shuttle, and the shuttle has cleared the tower.
And then this beast, this creature, just rose very gently. It's saying, let me go. I've been born. I'm ready to fly.
It was like, this is working.
Your heart's pounding at that period of time, but you're also listening to these reports coming in, and you say, hey, it's going pretty doggone well.
Seeing that vehicle lift off was the highlight of my entire career.
Roger on the SEP, Columbia. Mark, 2 minutes, 20 seconds. Confirm solid rocket booster SEP.
When we finally heard that MECO call, main engine cutoff, when it's basically in orbit, we just were all out of our seats just cheering.
Young and Crippen were now orbiting Earth at a speed of 5 miles every second. It was the dawn of a new era in space travel.
Hey, who's that, John?
Yes, sir.
How you doing?
We're just having a lot of fun up here.
Hey, listen, I'm glad to talk to both you and Crip. How's he behaving?
I'm trying to behave pretty well, Mr. Vice President.
Well, listen, it's a far
Vice President George Bush's tribute was beamed around the world.
I think your trip is just going to ignite the excitement and the forward thinking from this country, so I really just wanted to call up and wish you the very best.
Okay, Mr. Vice President. Thank you very much, sir.
But the euphoria was short-lived. 90 minutes into the mission, the crew opened the shuttle's cargo bay doors to release heat generated by the electronics. A camera inside the hold suddenly revealed the engineer's worst nightmare. 16 of the spaceship's revolutionary heat protection tiles were missing from its tail section.
What appears to be 3 tile and some smaller pieces. Roger, Crip, we can see that good.
With the tiles missing, the shuttle's aluminum airframe would be exposed to temperatures of up to 3,000 degrees as it re-entered the Earth's atmosphere. This could be the biggest disaster in space history.
If you lose a single tile, you lose the vehicle. Not all 25,000, but there are a lot of, there are thousands which are critical. Lose one on entry and you lose the vehicle.
Mission Control immediately alerted engineer Tom Moser.
Complete at 8.5.
That was a 911 call because we thought, oh my God, now we've got a known situation. So I hopped on an airplane, went back to Houston, got with the other engineers.
Moser and his team worked around the clock. They analyzed every frame of footage, calculating and recalculating temperatures that the shuttle would encounter where the tiles were missing.
We have to recognize that we will have various glitches during the course of a mission, and we have to be prepared to make an assessment as to what are we going to do about it.
When the shuttle plowed through the atmosphere, the highest temperatures would develop on its underbelly. The heat around the tail, where the tiles were missing, would be less extreme. The engineers concluded that Columbia should make it home as long as the tiles on the underbelly were intact. But there was no way of knowing that for sure.
Risk is the price of progress. Risk is what we must accept to continue moving forward.
After 54 hours in space, Young and Crippen were cleared to re-enter the Earth's atmosphere with a damaged heat shield. The entire future of the shuttle program depended on whether the tile engineers at NASA had gotten it right.
50% quantity, copy. 66, that sounds better.
And for almost 30 heart-stopping minutes, when the tiles were exposed to the most extreme temperatures, Mission Control would have no radio contact with Columbia.
It was an anxious time because as the orbiter comes back through the atmosphere, it ionizes the gas and it blocks out all communications.
No one would know if the crew were alive or dead.
We had nothing to do but sit and wait.
It's almost like you'd been holding your breath for an entire day, and you just suck that air in. And
all those memories of problems with the thermal protection system, problems with the entry flight control system, problems that had been given to us in our training simulations, all of those things that could go wrong could be going on.
Finally, John Young's voice crackled over the static.
Hello, Columbia. Houston's here. How do you read?
But Columbia faces one more test. The shuttle now had to land. No other spaceship had ever returned from orbit to touch down on an airstrip. Columbia may be the world's most complex vehicle, but on landing, there's no engine power to make flight corrections. She's a 100-ton glider.
They're coming. You're down. 40, 30, 4, 3, 2, 1. Touchdown.
After 1 million miles in space, Columbia's wheels kissed the ground.
Beautiful, beautiful. You'll have to take it up the hangar, Joe.
It worked. It worked. I think it actually shocked a lot of us that the engineers were able to pull that off. I think John Young and Bob Crippen took the greatest risk in the history of anybody's space program when they flew the shuttle.
when he came out of the shuttle after landing, he was just bouncing around in that space chute. You know, seeing this man so happy, not that he survived the entry, but the space system and the entire team performed so well.
I was taken back by the emotion that came out, and tears were flowing down my cheeks and all. And I think a lot of people felt that way too. The mission was a success now.
It had taken nearly a decade to build the world's first reusable spacecraft. But in April 1981, the age of the shuttle had arrived. America was back in space. By the early 80s, the Space Shuttle was ready to go to work, deploying satellites, military hardware, and scientific equipment. NASA eventually built a whole fleet of shuttles. Columbia, Challenger, Atlantis, Discovery, and later, Endeavour. In 1983, British astrophysicist Mike Fole headed to Houston with the dream of swapping his laboratory in Cambridge for one in the Space Shuttle.
This is the full fuselage trainer. It's the shuttle that turned me on to becoming an astronaut.
The shuttle is now Mike's second home. He launched 6 times and spent over a year of his life in space.
Well, this is the middeck. This is the room in between the flight deck and the floor of the Space Shuttle where the main nose gear is. This room is where basically the crew lives, sleeps, eats, washes, and also goes to the bathroom. It's a bit like an airliner toilet. It has the obvious place where you sit down. It has handles to hold you down on the toilet. There's a vacuum control. You can break the toilet. If you break the toilet, you are the most unpopular person on the Space Shuttle for the rest of your flight. And it hasn't happened more than, I think, once. Above us is the flight deck. A difference between airliners and the Space Shuttle is that all our switches, specifically, have guards around them. They have metal guards. And they serve 2 purposes. One is to make sure you hit the correct switch before you throw it. But second, it allows you in zero gravity when you're floating around to hold on to something. If it's a touch screen, like in an airliner, and you touch it, you're going to push yourself off away from the screen. So there are subtle differences between the way a cockpit's laid out for a spacecraft and for an airliner.
With the shuttle now open for business, NASA began securing contracts from the commercial industry. In the early 80s, the world stood on the brink of a technological revolution. Personal computers and CD players went on sale for the first time, and TV networks started to broadcast by satellite. The shuttle was the right vehicle at the right time, helping to improve television services and telephone communications all over the world. For the first time in its history, NASA had a spacecraft generating a revenue stream.
Basically, we had moved into an entirely new era of technology that could be exploited by commercial enterprises.
The Space Shuttle was to exploit, not to explore space.
And the shuttle could do something that had never been possible before. Using its 50-foot-long robotic arm, astronauts could retrieve, repair, and upgrade satellites.
What we did with the shuttle was really what you would call going to work in space. Putting satellites out, dropping them off, and sending them up to other orbits, retrieving satellites, repairing satellites.
Pretty blue-collar work, but we didn't care. I mean, none of us cared what we were doing as long as it put us in space.
The shuttle's heavy workload meant astronauts were spending more time in space than ever before, and there was an incredible perk to the job.
I would stay up late on my shuttle missions so I could have an opportunity to look out the window, and I would tell my crew, you have to do this before we deorbit and land, because if you don't take some time to look out the window, then you're missing One of the most, to me, the most important things on the human side of flying in space is looking down on the planet.
The sunrises and sunsets are just fascinating to watch because they're happening 16 times as fast as they happen down here on the Earth. Because you go around the Earth every 90 minutes. So you're going to be 45 minutes in the daylight, 45 minutes in the dark, 45 minutes in the daylight. So the sun goes up and down 16 times a day.
I know from my first flight, I spent so much time looking out the window that I only slept maybe 4 hours a night, and after a couple of days, you can't keep going like that.
Test pilots try very hard not to be emotional, and yet I would readily admit when I first had the time, the luxury to look back at the Earth, it just sent chills up my spine. My hair stood up on the back of my neck, and I kept thinking, the guys that made the globe in the high school library there, they got it just right. I couldn't figure out how they did it.
As missions grew in length and frequency, astronauts also discovered the more everyday aspects of life in orbit.
We tend to think of spaceflight as very exotic, but in point of fact, what goes on day to day in space is quite ordinary. You eat, you sleep, you go to the bathroom, you get dressed, you do your work. When it comes to eating, a lot of energy goes into deciding what the crew needs to eat, how many calories they need to maintain their fitness in orbit. And we typically don't have freezers and refrigerators in orbit because they are power hogs. So the good people in the food sciences have come up with all manner of food, some 200 items. Standard favorite is macaroni and cheese, the ultimate comfort food. A crew member would go to the galley and squirt hot water into this and then really just massage it with the fingers and hands to get the water well distributed. This food item is the crew's favorite. This is shrimp cocktail, and crews report that their taste buds are dulled in orbit and foods taste bland. So the spicy cocktail sauce or other hot sauces are among their favorites, anything to give it more flavor.
Working on an experiment known as BioPack, which is from...
On each mission, the shuttle's new breed of astronauts would conduct unique scientific experiments.
So you look in your checklist and it'll say at mission elapsed time, 1 day, 6 hours, 10 minutes, you turn on this experiment. So it's all choreographed to the second.
The amount of science that we did on the shuttle was awesome. There's so many different fields that have benefited.
Experiments were designed to explore the history of the universe, look down on our planet, and reveal the effects of zero gravity on life, from single-celled organisms to the human body.
I wanted to understand what happened to people when they went into space. There's certain things that happen in your body because of gravity that we didn't know before, because we've never been in a place where there wasn't gravity acting on us in some way.
The shuttle's extraordinary versatility was making headlines, and the public fell in love with space once again.
Space shuttles made their way into everything. They made their way onto clothing. They made their way into toys. You had all kinds of space shuttle toys. And it literally became the symbol of the American space program.
The shuttle was flying more and more missions each year. But the task of servicing the spacecraft between launches was proving far more time-consuming and costly than originally anticipated.
the message came down from Washington that we had to turn the shuttle around in 2 weeks. And so that's what we said we could do. We didn't have a clue. I mean, we didn't know how to reuse the system. We didn't know what was going to be required.
The shuttle has 2.5 million individual components. Almost 1,000 of them are critical. If any one failed, it would result in the total loss of the vehicle. To ensure the safety of each mission, every tile, circuit breaker, and valve needs inspecting, repairing, or replacing.
When you're crawling around the orbiter processing facility at Kennedy Space Center and you see, hundreds or maybe even thousands of people that are required to get the shuttle ready for flight, then it really sinks in what a complex vehicle this is.
The shuttle had revealed its weakness. The task of returning to flight was too intricate, and the pressure to launch the shuttle would soon lead to tragedy.
We were not approaching shuttle launches with the same degree of rigor that we had in, let's say, the first 6 launches. We were innocent to a certain degree, and Challenger was the end of that innocence.
Liftoff of the 25th Space Shuttle mission.
On January 28, 1986, the Space Shuttle was due to launch on its 25th mission into orbit. It was shaping up to be NASA's busiest year yet.
The shuttle program at that point was viewed as a great success. It had been building toward a large number of flights, and they were going to continue that increase in operational activity because this was going to be routine. This was all viewed as something that we were going to do on a regular basis.
But the night before Challenger's departure, temperatures plummeted well below freezing, and large icicles formed on the launch pad. There was concern for the safety of the heat protection tiles.
I got a call that night from the program manager, and he said that there was a situation which was concerning, and they want to make sure that everything was okay, or should we scrub the mission? One of the concerns was the ice would hit the tiles and damage them. So we formed a team that night, and we convinced ourselves that we were safe for flight. So I reported back to the program manager that we were go for flight.
But this flight was different from any other. Among Challenger's astronauts was a member of the public, 37-year-old school teacher and mother of 2, Krista McAuliffe. She had been chosen from more than 11,000 teachers for a White House initiative designed to encourage children to study the tough subjects of science and engineering.
The idea that you could take someone, a non-professional astronaut, a teacher, a newsman, and fly them seemed to us to be a little bit premature. So as it came around to that and we saw the publicity, I think many of us said, this isn't all bad, because if it helps us sustain the Space Shuttle program with support through the Congress and the public, then that's good. Let's just hope it's safe enough.
Are you feeling any apprehension at all about going up into space?
Well, not right now, but I really don't think the whole thing has hit me.
The morning of launch day.
This is shuttle launch control at T-minus 2 hours, 28 minutes and counting. Here comes the 51L flight crew, ready to depart the O&C building for the launch pad.
As the 7 crew members made their way to the shuttle, temperatures on the pad were still barely above freezing.
7 minutes and counting.
School kids in Krista's hometown of Concord, New Hampshire, tuned in to watch the historic occasion.
T-minus 15 seconds.
At 11:29 a.m., the command, go for launch was given.
7, 6. We have main engine start. 3, 2, 1, and liftoff. Liftoff of the 25th Space Shuttle mission, and it has cleared the tower.
As Challenger left Earth, communications were transferred from launch control in Florida to mission control in Houston. Astronaut Dick Covey was in charge of communicating with Challenger that day.
As we watched and the launch progressed, throttle down was as expected. Not any big deal there.
Engines at 65%, 3 engines running normally, 3 good fuel cells. 65, Fido. TDL confirms throttles. Thank you.
I made the call, go at throttle up. Challenger, go at throttle up. It's a standard call. Everything also, the absence of anything else says everything looks normal to us.
Engines throttling up, 3 engines now at 104%.
Challenger, go at throttle up. Roger, go at throttle up.
Flight controllers here looking very carefully at the situation. Obviously a major malfunction.
When I looked up at the monitor, I could not tell what I was looking at. I hadn't seen the explosion. All I saw was this fireball, clearly a fireball. And I tried to make sense of what I was seeing, and it didn't make any sense. I looked back down, all of the data on my panel had gone to missing.
Fido trajectory. Go ahead.
Flight GC, we've had negative contact, lost downlink.
Okay, everybody, stay off the telephones. Make sure you maintain all your data. Start pulling it together. Waiting word from any recovery forces in the downrange field.
The disaster unfolded live on television.
Reports from the flight dynamics officer indicate that the vehicle apparently exploded and that impact in the water.
Flight Fido.
Go ahead.
RSO reports vehicle exploded.
Copy.
That's when I realized that the emotional part of it really hit me then. Because then we were beyond work. We were beyond our training. We had run the gamut of even ideas of what we might do. Now we were in an accident recovery situation. That's hard to do when you're accepting the reality that you just saw a crew die.
Very few accidents are captured live. You generally see the after effect of an explosion or a fire or whatever it is. It was an extremely difficult morning.
We will never forget them, nor the last time we saw them, this morning, as they prepared for their journey and waved goodbye, and slipped the surly bonds of earth to touch the face of God.
We didn't dwell really on the risks involved, at least at that point, because we had never lost anybody in space, and I think we couldn't envision that anything would happen. Perhaps we were in denial.
We were naive to that degree, we were innocent to a certain degree, and Challenger was the end of that innocence.
Immediately following the disaster, all shuttles were grounded, and one of the most intense and thorough investigations in history began.
I know, Mr. Kilminster, you signed the document that went to NASA to launch, but in a sense, it was almost like a committee decision. There was no one person that was responsible.
Yes, sir.
After 4 months, the Presidential Commission published their report. It revealed that the loss of 7 astronauts and the $2 billion spacecraft had been caused by a simple pair of rubber O-rings in the solid rocket boosters.
This tragic accident was a result of the failure of that joint on the right aft booster rocket.
The rocket boosters are made up of 6 cylindrical segments stacked on top of each other. At each joint between the segments, a pair of rubber O-rings, a primary and backup, make an airtight seal inside the joint. On the day of Challenger's launch, the boosters ignited, firing a flame down the center of each rocket. In a split second, an explosive force caused the steel casing to expand outward. But because of the freezing temperatures that morning, the rubber O-rings had hardened and failed to seal the joints properly. Flames burst through the gap with catastrophic effect. But what was also shocking was the Commission discovered O-rings had failed on previous launches, and NASA had known about it all along. Disaster had only been prevented because the backup ring held.
What shocked us was it was a predictable failure, that there was a long history of problems with the O-rings. That was shocking.
But there was a further damning revelation in the report. The night before the mission, there was another phone call about the decision to lift off. The solid rocket contractors advised NASA managers it was too cold to launch Challenger. But under pressure from NASA, the contractors reversed their decision from a no launch to a go launch.
But this had never occurred before, this last-minute critical decision as to whether to launch or not launch. And
the investigation exposed massive procedural failures in NASA's decision-making. The loss of Challenger's 7 crew members was the first time in American space history that astronauts had died in flight.
This is going to be a safe thing, and all of a sudden, pow, it is in your face. It is not safe. It's dangerous. It can be deadly. And that was a real shock. I think it was a shock because everybody expected it to be perfectly safe. Those of us that worked in the industry knew that was not true, but we didn't talk about it a lot.
The future of NASA's space program now hung in the balance. Would the shuttle ever fly again? Following the Challenger disaster in 1986, NASA's shuttle flight operations facilities lay deserted. All space shuttles were grounded. NASA spent the next 2 years on a $1.4 billion overhaul of their spacecraft, making over 200 modifications.
It was extremely important that NASA find a way to fly again as soon as possible. Waiting to fly again risked the whole program. In fact, it could risk the agency.
Finally, in 1988, the shuttle made its way back to the launch pad. And flying aboard the first mission since Challenger was the last man to speak with Challenger's crew, astronaut Dick Covey.
The interest wasn't on our mission, it was on the crew. Unlike anything that we had seen, who are these men who are going to go fly on the next space shuttle flight after the previous one blew up and killed all the crew members?
The mission was an unqualified success. But as regular shuttle service resumed, the ambition of an affordable fast turnaround spacecraft was proving ever more elusive. Commercial satellites were now increasingly launched on conventional rockets, and the shuttle needed to find a new purpose urgently.
The Space Shuttle was built to be a very versatile spacecraft for a variety of tasks and a variety of roles. And its role has changed over time, almost decade by decade. In the 1980s, the Space Shuttle was primarily a delivery truck. And in the 1990s, it was really a science platform.
Since the 1940s, one of science's most cherished dreams was to build a giant orbiting telescope to unlock the big question: how old is our universe? In 1990, that dream would become reality with the Hubble Space Telescope, providing the Space Shuttle with its finest moment.
Oh, when you saw it, it was mind-boggling, because I remember the first time I saw it, it was sitting in the vertical. It was gigantic.
Hubble promised to capture faint light that had traveled billions of years across the universe.
We were about to put an instrument on orbit in a unique environment that was going to rewrite the astronomy book.
To get Hubble to its optimum altitude of 380 miles, the shuttle would go further than it had ever gone before.
DPS. Go. Eagle. Go.
If the spaceship's fuel systems failed this far from Earth, the astronauts would be unable to return home.
GC. Go. Network go.
The risky thing is you have separate fuel systems for each of the two engines. When you go that high, if you had a major problem with one system, you couldn't get back on the other system.
Okay, Capcom, we have a go for release. Discovery, go for Hubble release.
With Hubble deployed, the telescope's two vast mirrors could open a window on the heavens with unprecedented clarity. Light entering Hubble bounces off its primary mirror onto a secondary mirror that reflects the light back to a focal point where it's captured for analysis. The world eagerly anticipated the arrival of Hubble's first photographs of the universe. But when the images were beamed back, they were blurred.
The Hubble Space Telescope had a very successful launch, but within a matter of days of its being turned on and checked out, the scientific community realized that something was terribly wrong with it.
Hubble's primary mirror had been ground to the wrong dimensions. A 50th of the width of a human hair was all it took to make the telescope short-sighted. It was a humiliating disaster for NASA and put the shuttle program at risk again.
If we were going to go to the moon or go back to Mars, Mars would be a year's flight. We couldn't have a goof up the way we had with Hubble. Suppose the oxygen failed. What are we going to do? Say, hang on, we'll be there in 6 months?
We were denounced in the halls of Congress. Hubble was a techno-turkey.
Why were the two mirrors never tested together before launch when such...
Plus, of course, back then, NASA was thinking of building a space station, and it was pretty clear that Congress wasn't going to have any of this, that this was a disaster.
Only the shuttle could get Hubble into space. And now only the shuttle could fix it.
Since the flaw was in the primary mirror, which is 96 inches across, and buried deep in the heart of the telescope, it was completely inaccessible and could not be reached, could not be removed. So the ingenious repair mission was to figure out a way to correct the flaw in the mirror.
NASA's solution to restore Hubble's eyesight was COSTAR. It consisted of several small mirrors that intercepted the light from the flawed mirror, fixed the defect, and relayed the corrected beam to the scientific instruments at the focal point. But the fix would require the most complex repair mission in the history of space exploration.
From the point of view of the public, the purpose of our mission was to fix Hubble's optics. But in fact, there were many things that were wrong with Hubble. We needed to replace the solar panels. That was one of the big jobs. The gyroscopes were failing. And alongside that, there were little things. I mean, we had to replace some circuit breakers. There was electronic control box that had to be fixed, a recorder, you know, a lot of little things that we needed to do.
NASA astronauts Jeff Hoffman and Story Musgrave trained for 11 months, simulating the weightlessness of space in a vast water tank.
As a spacewalker, I need the right moves. If you're putting the motherboard in a computer, if you're putting memory chips in, if you're doing this or that, it's the moves you make that'll guarantee the outcome. We were at it 16 hours a day.
There wasn't going to be anything that we could have done to prepare for the mission that didn't get done.
By December 1993, they were ready. But many inside NASA doubted the success of the mission.
NASA headquarters had no faith that we were going to pull it off.
We had a tight timeline. We had to get to the telescope. We had to capture it. We had to start getting guys out the door the next day.
It took 3 days for the shuttle to reach the stricken telescope. After carefully maneuvering the spaceship into position, its remotely controlled robotic arm reached out to grab hold of Hubble.
Rigid eyes, Space Telescope Captain.
Endeavour has a firm handshake with Mr. Hubble's telescope.
There was relief all around.
We copy that, Cubby, and there are smiles galore down here.
It's quite a sight.
Great work up there, you guys.
The crew had to attempt 5 dangerous spacewalks back to back. It had never been done before. Fixing Hubble's faulty mirror was relatively straightforward. Installing a new camera with corrected optics also went to plan. But another part of the operation proved more difficult. The astronauts had to replace 4 of the gyroscopes that kept Hubble stable. But they were located deep inside the telescope.
To get access to them, you gotta reach way back in there. So I came up with this procedure in which I would get into the work position. It's so tight in there.
If one of us could actually slide in underneath the gyroscopes, we could get the job done much faster.
So I had my buddy Jeff grab me by the feet and he fed me up inside the telescope.
I held on to Story, positioned him properly, and then he sort of locked himself in place, and we went through the replacement one after the other, and they all worked. So we felt really good.
All that was left to do was close Hubble's doors and get back into the shuttle.
I went to shut the door and close the latch, and it didn't latch properly. And so I opened it again and, closed it, didn't latch. And that's when I thought to myself, oh boy.
It's not closing, the doors aren't closing right. Let's try to get the bottom. Let me get the bottom coming in before you close that door.
I can't figure out why the doors won't close.
Unless the doors were securely fastened, the extreme cold could destroy the telescope's fragile components. Hubble would become a billion-dollar piece of space junk.
And we finally came up with the idea of making an unusual use of one of our ratchet devices. The movers use them to hold down furniture inside moving vans.
After nearly 2 hours carefully manipulating the doors, they finally got them closed.
We held the doors together in alignment, and with 2 fingers I moved to come along, and it pulled them together, so we had it.
We got the door closed.
Good work, guys.
After a grueling 10 days in orbit, the crew was able to report mission accomplished to the intense relief of NASA's management.
And we have to say that through your superb efforts, you have really shown that NASA can do all that we promised to do and more, and we very much appreciate it.
We had succeeded beyond anybody's wildest dreams. I mean, everything that we had set out to do, we had done successfully.
Since its repair, the Hubble Space Telescope has photographed black holes, dust storms, and melting ice caps on Mars. It's seen stars being born and dying, and measured the rate at which the universe is expanding.
Well, Hubble, through more than 20 years in Earth orbit now, has been probably the most significant astronomical instrument that has been used in our history. It has opened our eyes to things that we had never dreamt of previously. But more than that is the scientific knowledge we have gained about black holes, about the nature of Big Bang, about the possibilities of dark matter and dark energy. All of these have been aided fundamentally in our efforts to understand the cosmos.
The Hubble rescue mission showcased the shuttle's unique abilities to retrieve and repair large structures in space. This versatility had originally been conceived for a much larger and more ambitious project, one that had always been deemed unaffordable until now. In 1993, the U.S. Congress approved the billions of dollars needed to construct a permanently manned space station in orbit.
The International Space Station is the largest international engineering project ever attempted in the history of mankind, both in terms of scale, money, people involved, anything you want to talk about.
It would be a living, working environment in space that could only be constructed using the shuttle.
The Space Shuttle and a space station were seen as companion ventures to establish that permanent presence in space.
The money was in place, and by the early 90s, so were the politics. Cold War relations between Russia and America that had started the space race had now warmed.
Russia was the Soviet Union. They were our Cold War enemies. And come the 1990s, I'm training with Russians. I'm going to Russia. I'm in their mission control. I'm in Star City. I'm speaking in Russian. I never thought that this would happen.
The shuttle's astronauts had a new role, this time as the world's most highly trained construction workers on the most prestigious building project of all time.
The Russians didn't have the big hauling capability of the space shuttle and the ability to send a large crew up to do a lot of the intricate work.
Over 13 years, they flew more than 30 missions, hauling essential parts into space and assembling the station piece by piece.
The shuttle, with its big payload bay, was able to haul lots of stuff up there, including modules that were built literally all over the world by engineers and scientists who speak different languages, have different cultures, and they put it together in Earth orbit with astronauts and cosmonauts, and it works. That's the most remarkable thing to me. The plug-and-play aspects of this is truly unbelievable.
The crew requests permission to come aboard. 2 Endeavour, permission granted.
The International Space Station has now been permanently manned for more than 10 years. In that time, the shuttle has carried scientists and engineers from 15 nations to work together in zero gravity. They've conducted groundbreaking research that may lead to new vaccines and techniques to kill airborne pathogens, and improved our understanding of man-made disasters on Earth. By the turn of the new millennium, the shuttle's reputation as the world's most successful space program seemed secure.
Endeavour from the PLT, vent door purge positioning is underway.
February 1st, 2003. The crew of the shuttle Columbia were on a routine mission. Columbia was the oldest shuttle in the fleet, and the first to launch into orbit, more than 20 years earlier. This was her 28th flight. The crew was made up of 7 men and women with a diverse range of skills. 4 of them were on their first mission. They had spent 16 days in space, conducting science experiments and sending videos back to Earth. Now they were due to head home. As the crew started their descent toward Earth, film footage inside the cockpit showed everything going to plan.
It's amazing. It's really getting really bright out there. Yeah, you definitely don't want to be outside now.
We operate so close to these hazards that we have to experience in all of our missions. We have to be almost perfect. You know, really good isn't good enough.
But 10 minutes after Columbia re-entered the atmosphere, Mission Control noticed 4 temperature sensors in the left wing had failed.
4 high return temps?
To the left outboard, left inboard L1.
Where is that instrumentation located?
All 4 are located in the aft part of the left wing.
Instrument malfunction at this stage was not uncommon.
Everything look good to you? Control and rates and everything is nominal, right?
Done so far, flight. We have good trims. I don't see anything out of the ordinary.
Okay.
All other readings appeared normal. But minutes later, more sensors failed.
And flight econ?
Econ.
I've got 4 temperature sensors on the bottom line data that are off scale low.
Suddenly, Shuttle Commander Rick Husband's words cut out mid-sentence.
Flight max are also off.
Columbia, Houston, UHF comm check. Columbia, Houston, UHF comm check. Columbia, Houston, UHF comm check.
Flight final.
Within minutes, a TV network in Dallas was broadcasting amateur footage that appeared to show the spaceship leaving an unusual cluster of bright lights in its wake.
GC flight. GC flight. Flight GC. Lock the doors. Copy. No phone calls, off-site, no data, no phone calls, no transmissions anywhere into or out.
The Columbia's lost. There are no survivors.
17 years after the Challenger disaster, the world was once again in shock, bewildered by another seemingly inexplicable catastrophe.
People just spontaneously went to any place that had to do with space to gather together and participate in a kind of public ritual of mourning. And a lot of people left mementos and messages to the crews. And some of the most poignant of the items that were left were little greeting cards made by students expressing sorrow or expressing a sense that the astronauts were heroes. To the 7 brave members of Columbia who gave the ultimate sacrifice in pursuit of knowledge.
Once again, NASA had to set emotions aside, working around the clock to discover the root cause. Over 12,000 pieces of debris were spread across Texas, Louisiana, and Arkansas. At the Kennedy Space Center in Cape Canaveral, the debris was laid out for investigation. One of the men charged with analyzing the evidence was aeronautical engineer Scott Hubbard.
We were living with each other practically 24 hours a day over almost 7 months.
In addition to the wreckage, the team also reviewed video footage of the launch in search of clues.
We had some very grainy film that showed a piece of foam falling off and hitting the orbiter. So we turned it over to some of the nation's best film processors, people that worked for national security agencies, worked for the military, and out of all that effort came a cleaned up, best available view of what happened.
Hubbard was convinced this was the strongest clue so far. But he immediately met resistance from NASA's management.
There seemed to be, from the very top of the agency, a disparaging or a derisive or a dismissive attitude toward investigating this particular line of evidence.
Right now, it just does not make sense to us that a piece of debris would be the root cause for the loss of Columbia and its crew. There's got to be another reason.
This made me angry to some extent because I thought, we really need to show what happened.
The accident investigation team analyzed shuttle wing samples sourced from NASA and the Enterprise glider housed at the Smithsonian's National Air and Space Museum. Determined to find the proof they needed, they decided to stage a series of tests.
I was putting my own career reputation on the line and saying, I think this is the right thing to do.
The plan? To recreate the exact conditions of a foam strike on the leading edge of Columbia's left wing.
3, 2, 1, 0.
The gun made its boom, and there was a little bit of mist in the air, and it cleared. We saw this enormous, maybe foot size hole with jagged edges around it. And I remember an audible gasp. And I remember a young woman who had been supporting us all along as part of the shuttle engineering crew coming to me, literally with tears in her eyes and saying, this is how they died, isn't it? And I said, yes, I believe it is. And that was a day that I will remember forever.
Columbia was doomed 82 seconds after launch. As the shuttle reached 66,000 feet, she was traveling at 1,870 miles per hour, as fast as a speeding bullet. At this velocity, all it took to pierce the skin of the spacecraft was a piece of foam weighing 2.5 pounds.
It's a fantastic ride all the way up.
Columbia's crew of 7 had spent 16 days on board, completely unaware of the gaping hole in the left wing. Nearly 7 months after the accident, the investigation team announced their findings.
Mr. Hubbard. Thank you. In 4 simple words, the foam did it. I had terribly conflicting emotions. On the one hand, I wanted to say, yes, we were right. On the other hand, I thought to myself, oh my God, you know, this is how the crew died. This is what was responsible.
Perhaps most damning of all, the investigation also revealed that just 24 hours into the mission, NASA engineers had reviewed film of the launch and noticed the foam strike. They reported it to their superiors, who failed to act on the information. Once again, NASA's management and their decision-making processes were under fire.
The public reaction to Columbia was they were astounded that NASA had screwed up again.
The Columbia disaster confirmed beyond doubt that space travel on board the shuttle remained risky and unpredictable. For NASA's aging shuttle fleet, the final countdown loomed. In 2004, President Bush announced that once it had served its purpose, building the space station, the shuttle would be retired.
The Columbia accident convinced me, and I think many other people, that it was time to retire the shuttle. The shuttle is aging. It is high risk. Been 2 accidents and, you know, a little over 100 flights. That's not very good odds.
The age of the space shuttle had entered its final phase. On July 21st, 2011, the shuttle landed at the Kennedy Space Center for the very last time.
Landing was at 4:57 a.m. Central Time, 5:57 a.m. Eastern Time, about 41 minutes before sunrise.
The fleet has flown 135 times at a cost of $209 billion in today's money.
It sounds like a no-brainer that reusing a spacecraft would make it cheaper. As it turned out, the reusability feature made it more expensive because after it lands, you have all of these thousands of systems and lines that have to be tested and pressurized and drained and checked. It turned out to be much more difficult than anybody ever anticipated.
For now, the shuttle's job will be conducted by other, cheaper spacecraft. But the 3 surviving shuttles will become monuments to the pioneering spirit of space exploration, inspiring the next generation of astronauts. Atlantis will be exhibited at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. Endeavour will reside in the California Science Center in Los Angeles. And Discovery will be displayed at the Smithsonian's National Air and Space Museum in Washington, D.C.
The Space Shuttle has been an inspiration to generations of young people who will want to continue the effort to move out into space.
When I go and talk to young kids and I say, how many of you would like to be astronauts? All the hands go up.
The shuttle has earned its rightful place in the Air and Space Hall of Fame.
Four-fifths of all the people that have ever been in space were carried on the space shuttle.
And external tank separation is confirmed.
The science conducted on the space shuttle will continue to have remarkable impact on humanity.
studied the sun. We carried the Ulysses mission, which went above the poles of the sun for the first time. Carried the Magellan probe that radar mapped Venus, carried the Galileo probe that went to Jupiter, made maps for parts of the world for which there had been no maps.
Space Shuttle, post-Challenger, have two great legacies: Hubble Space Telescope, Space Station.
I still have to pinch myself every once in a while and say, did this really happen?
355 individual astronauts flew on the Space Shuttle, completing 21,152 Earth orbits, traveling over 542 million miles, enough to reach Jupiter. Today, America's ambitions in space are changing. Future exploration is now focused on deep space. But the shuttle gave the world a glimpse of what the future might hold. Living and working in orbit on the first reusable spacecraft.
The shuttle is still the most awesome, fantastic transportation system ever existed.
An extraordinary engineering achievement, a high watermark, an eighth wonder of the world, if you will.
It was 30 good years of doing a whole bunch of stuff.
It really rewrote the book on space.